My name is Robert E. Stevenson, and I'm a native of Macquarie County. Was born here and have lived here all of my life except for a tour of duty with the Marine Corps, and the time that I've spent here when I've been away since I came back from the Marine Corps has always been to try to help people from the bad effects of some of the programs that the Forest Service has. The clear cutting programs, the spraying of pesticides and herbicides, and some of the practices that they have that are not good for the people of Macquarie County.
What is the value to you of national forest lands? Of public forest land?
The value of national public forest land is not just to me, it's to all the citizens of Kentucky and this nation. And it's for them to come back and see what a cycle is where ecosystems are allowed to thrive. From the weed stage to the hardwood stage.
Would you describe an original project that you worked on helping people, as you say, that got you involved with looking at environmental issues?
The Forest Service decided that they were going to take a 4-H camp that we had built for our youngsters, and they were going to razz all the buildings, and take the area and plant it in pines. And several of the local people got together, and we made a trip to Washington and did a presentation. And as a result, the camp was saved, and it's still there and active. And we, of course, have used that as a basis for training our youth, for doing things educational for them to help them understand what's taking place out there in the woods.
Could you describe, in the history of your involvement here in Macquarie County, what you've seen in terms of tree farming on the national forest lands and how their activities have changed and developed in regards to that?
They planted large acreage of pines. They would cut the hardwoods from the land, plant the pines, and then when the pines are beginning to grow, the broadleaf has a tendency to come out above the pine in the beginning. But as the pine grows, as the broadleaf grows and the pine, it's shaded, and they want to kill the broadleaf underneath the pine. That cycle takes place with causing many spray sites, many different types of chemicals, some of which have been banned. 2,4-D, 2,4,5-T, Agent Orange was one of these. And of course, once the pine grows up, and in succession, every 4 or 5 years, they would apply the chemicals, so that once the pines do grow, then they harvest them, and want to go back to the same cycle, and the hardwood doesn't have a chance. And what you're actually doing here is affecting the cycle of life for all of the animals and that live in the forest, and especially the people that live along these ridges. The end result is that when they do these sprays, we have morning breezes and evening breezes as they go up back in the morning or down at night based on the variation in temperature. That brings the chemicals that have been sprayed that day right into the windows of the home along these ridges. And that has led to a cancer rate that is 114% greater than any other county in the state of Kentucky. It has been a disaster, and it continues to be a disaster. Now, for example, in the Rhine Creek area, they're starting this, and and we just the answer to the whole thing is you don't interrupt that cycle.
The forest recently experienced a blight by means of the southern pine beetle coming through. Can you tell us how that affected these pine areas where they've been treating as tree farms?
Those tree farms were wiped out because of two factors. One, the beetle came in and marched from one side of these areas to the other, and then we had bad storms that came in and blew a lot of the dead pines down. And as a result, you have a forest floor now that is covered with down pine in a lot of different areas. And they've tried to burn that to get rid of it, and supposedly then they want to go through the same cycle again. They want to plant pines in plots. They're not doing it as a plantation anymore, but they're doing it in definite plots along the level areas on the tops of the ridges.
Forest Service describes the history of this region as being a region somewhat, in some ways, governed by the onset of fire. In your lifetime, how would you describe the role of fire naturally occurring and that in terms of prescribed burns conducted by the Forest Service on this landscape?
Well, the natural burning from electrical storms, lightning. When I was a boy, for example, we had very few burned areas. They would be small plots, or somebody would burn their fields off, but our forefathers were careful not to let the fire extend into the forest. As it stands now, take, for example, the Rhine Creek area. They're going to burn in excess of 2,000 acres over there in one time. The only reason that I can see for the burning, they're going to cut the timber that's left, and then burn plus any pines that happen to have been in the area or any down timber. Oh yes, that sip of water reminds me of when I was a boy. I had an Uncle Charlie, and we went fishing, and we went possum hunting, and a lot of things in the woods at night. But and we could drink from any stream in Macquarie County. I wouldn't dare drink from any stream in Macquarie County. There's not any left to drink from that's clean enough to drink. It's they're all polluted. They've got mining debris in them. They got chemicals. the Cumberland River over there, a guy swam down the river a few years back, and he was dodging bottles. And just look at the river after you've had a high water. You'll see the bottles in the trees and all the pollution that is thrown into the river. So as we I went off to the Marine Corps and had a lot of training in chemical warfare, and I began to see that they would tell me that certain things were banned, and I come back home and I find they're using it out there in that in the environment, in the woods. So I began to be concerned about the fellows and the people around me, and I got involved in a project of cataloging all of the cemeteries, and everywhere that we went, we'd see signs on the trees. This area has been treated with 2,4-D, or this area has been treated with some other chemical. And everywhere we would go, we would see these large clear cuts with the trees windrowed. And in those areas, they began to, after they would windrow the material that was down, they would burn it. The burning was in not as concentrated as it is now. For example, when they burn this area over around Hayes Creek, they're just going to burn 2,000 acres. They're going to set fire on one end and let it walk to the other end. And their story is that they're going to let that fire walk down the hill. Well, they don't know enough to realize that you got the breezes, morning breeze and evening breeze, and when you start the fire, it'll go wherever the wind takes it. It's just a different change. It's a change in the way they've done things, that they picked a few segments out of from our past where people burned new grounds, and now they're trying to apply it to the whole county.
What would you describe life in McCreary County, a county that's roughly 60% owned by the National Forest Service, belongs to the public, but is managed by the Forest Service? How would you describe life here in such an exceptional place?
Well, life here has become, a lot of people have come back to the county. And for example, I spent all that time in the Marines. I came back and tried to work with the youth, and we have a lot of tourism that comes in, and the Forest Service caters to the things that they want the tourists to. For example, they're talking about over on that ridge, they'll put in 60 ponds. Well, that's something that the tourists would like to drive by and maybe do a little fishing or something, but it changes the way the water is taken into the system. Before, where it would be filtered out in the stream and would be fresh from a rainstorm, now it goes into a pond and becomes stagnated. Majority of our citizens now are retired people. Most of our youngsters left years ago, and like I did, and many of them never came back. The extent of getting out into the woods has changed. You go to a park, a place where you can sleep, ready-made, a recreational area. The difference was that when I went somewhere, for example, if I went to Marsh Creek and took my fishing poles, I caught a cat down there one time that weighed 22 pounds. That cat can't live in that water anymore. It's so polluted, and the pollution is from the runoff from agricultural, which they call Forest Service procedures. The sediment is loaded with the chemicals. It goes into the flesh of the fish. You eat the fish, then it goes into your flesh, and it may lay there dormant for 15 years, 20 years. But eventually you'll come down with cancer, or something will happen to you. Now that's the difference in the way things were as a boy. And in the old time, we had our elders, many of them lived to be 102, 100. Most of the Stevenses did. Now it's they're cutting time. If we continue at the route we're headed now, our children will be, their lifespan will be reduced by 10 to 20 years. People will be dying quicker. They won't exist here as long because it's the chemicals that it'll get them one way or another.
At what point do you recall the onset of the use of chemicals as a management tool of the forest?
The onset